She used me to track my friends. Used my body to get close to you.
Hey, do you want me to, describe what happened?
No, I don't want her memory. I want my own.
What is up, everybody? Jeremy Eisenfire here, and welcome to the channel. Severance Episode 6 is officially here, entitled Attila, and in this episode we got a pretty interesting mix of storylines throughout, with both Mark's innie and outie characters, an interesting storyline involving Milch, and of course the very infamous ham dinner. And with many of our characters going through trying times at the moment, one thing we see woven throughout the episode is the theme of growth, and how each character ultimately chooses to face it. The episode starts off not long after episode 5 left out, with Mark telling Ragabi about his latest memory of seeing Gemma for the first time on the Severance floor. And right off the bat, you can see how shaken Mark is at seeing her like this in this state, with him remarking that she didn't even recognize him and how she was just saying random things, which of course we recognize to be any Mark's wellness session with Miss Casey. And with Mark still puzzled as to why Lumon has her in the first place, he wonders what exactly they are doing to her, with Ragabi only stating that she is apparently essential, which we as the audience know that she is at the very least tied to this Cold Harbor case that seems to be so important to Lumon. And with Mark's innie of all people working on the Cold Harbor case, you get the sense that all of this is happening for a reason, and Lumon put these pieces into play purposely. But back on the Severance floor, we see Dylan telling Mark and Helly about the drawing that he found, and some of Irving's last words to him about finding this mysterious elevator, and even how the drawing has directions on the back of it that could potentially lead right to it, which of course leads Helly to believe that that could potentially be where they are keeping Miss Casey, which gives her the urge to take action, although Mark and Dylan are a little more hesitant, as we yet again continue to see Mark's reintegration messing with his mind. But eventually, we get a really good scene of Mark and Helly inside the bathroom, where Mark finally comes clean to her about what exactly happened between him and Helena on the Orpo, and how they shared a vessel, as Mark puts it. And knowing Helly, I did have a feeling she was going to be more angry than hurt when finding out about this. Angry at Helena for stealing her and Mark's first time together. And in typical Helly fashion, she takes complete control of the situation, telling Mark that she doesn't want Helena's memory. She wants to make her own, which of course they go on to do in their makeshift office tent. And one thing we did see a good example of in this episode are the clear differences between Helly and Helena, where Helly isn't the type to just sit idly by and let others make decisions for her, how she does always take charge herself, especially concerning her and Mark. And while initially finding out what Helena did to Helly definitely puts her in a bit of a grieving process, it's ultimately a memory of Helly taking control once again that gives her that strength to move past it. The memory of her and Mark having their first kiss and how she was the initiator, just as she is yet again initiating her desire to create her own memory with Mark. We also see in this episode that Mr. Milch is having quite a tough time coming to terms with his performance review as he calls Miss Wong into his office, in an attempt to not so subtly tell her that he knows it was her who made the complaints, as he reminds her that only he can pass her through this process and to put aside childish folly. And speaking of childish folly, that is one of the themes we see woven throughout the episode in terms of growth, where we have not only seen Mark experience some growth in terms of getting the courage to finally tell Helly the truth, but we also see that Milch himself is also wanting to experience growth as well, to put aside childish folly, to undo the mistakes of his performance review, a review that has left him so flustered he can't even stop his hand from shaking. And not only has the theme of growth been woven throughout this episode, but throughout the entirety of Season 2 as a whole. We've heard the creator of Severance talk about Season 1 and it being their childhood, with Season 2 now being them growing into adolescence, and the story definitely seems to be reflecting that. The show has certainly matured a lot in Season 2 compared to Season 1, and we are seeing our innies and outies deal with real-world, real-life problems, whereas Season 1 it was mostly contained to The Office. And here we see Milch expressing some of that growth by trying to shorten his speech pattern, to not speak in big words, which of course was one of the complaints that was levied against him. And even the improper use of paperclips seemed to be getting to Milch as well, as we see him frantically putting paperclips on paper the right way for a change. Ultimately, I do believe Milch will get to a point where he finally realizes he has been playing for the wrong team, but I do think it's going to be quite a while before he finally gets there. You do get the sense that this performance review has shaken him to his very core, to where now he's faced to come to terms with the fact that he's not the Lumon boss he thought he was, and he isn't the Lumon boss that they certainly want him to be. At the end of the day, it was Milch's kindness and his need to not be another Cobell that ended up getting him into trouble, from instituting kindness reforms to giving the innies far more leeway than she ever did, only to make him appear like a less competent leader than even she was in Lumon's eyes. Which is why I do believe we are going to see a much more strict Milch going forward from this point on. I don't think he's going to give the innies the freedom that he once did. And from here on out, I get the feeling we are going to see Milch strive to become that perfect Lumon boss that they want, as he forces himself to grow by essentially severing his kindness he had towards his employees. But ultimately, I do believe the seed of doubt has been planted inside Milch's mind where Lumon is concerned, and I get the feeling that it will start to sprout into something more, and he will finally realize he has been on the wrong side of things. But back on the severed floor, after Mark and Helly's mini Ortbo inside the office, we start to see that Mark is displaying similar symptoms as Petey once did after his reintegration, which of course went on to lead to his death. And now we see Mark experiencing similar, from a cough and flu-like symptoms to now having full-on nosebleeds just like Petey. Which makes what Mark does at the end of the episode that much more reckless, as Ragabi recommends a procedure that could help speed up the reintegration process, by going into Mark's brain and flooding the chip itself. And while initially it does seem to work, as Mark instantly starts remembering more memories of his innie and outie, it leads to disastrous consequences as Mark collapses at the end of the episode and begins to convulse. And while it's difficult to tell how extensive the damage will be, the flooding of the chip could potentially prove to have lasting ramifications for Mark's brain and his psyche. And yet again, it was Helena Eagan inserting herself into Mark's life that ultimately led to him making this reckless decision. We now see that Helena has started to initiate contact with Mark's outie now, which begs the case, just what exactly does she want with Mark? Is it simply that she is just attracted to him and is now trying to get closer to his outie now that she blew her cover with the innie? Or is she potentially working towards something bigger? And speaking of working towards something bigger, we finally arrive at the awkward ham dinner. And while the dinner initially starts off pleasantly enough, it quickly morphs into something much darker, as true intentions of some of our characters begin to come to light, including the evidence of Burt not being exactly who he appears to be, and how his outie and his innie seem to be polar opposites, which does seem to fit the theme of the show thus far, where usually the outie and the innie persona tend to be a little bit different. While Burt's innie fell in love with Irving, his outie is doing the exact opposite. As it appears, he invited Irving on this dinner just to get him out of his house so Drummond could search it freely, as we see Drummond breaking in at the same time as the dinner. And while one certainly could make the argument that Lumon was simply surveilling Irving's home and knew he wasn't there, but one tiny slip of a detail during the dinner between Burt, Irving, and Fields is showing Burt's hand that much more, when Fields states that Burt had been working for Lumon for 20 years, and as Irving points out, the Severance program had only been around for 12. Burt, of course, tries to play it off as Fields simply having too much to drink, but hopefully Irving sees it for the massive red flag that it is. After all, he did immediately point out the discrepancy in terms of how long Severance has been around. And just as it merely took one out-of-place line for any Irving to realize Helly wasn't herself, as he could not get over the Night Gardener statement, and hopefully this is another one of those lines that sticks into outie Irving's mind and makes him realize that Burt is also not who he appears to be. We also hear Burt mention something during the dinner about the Whole Mind people, an activist group that is protesting against the Severance program. And part of me is starting to wonder if Irving is already working with Whole Mind, which could potentially explain the phone calls that Irving keeps making in this mysterious phone booth that always seem to tie back to Lumon and his innie, along with also explaining why Irving was gathering so much intelligence on Lumon and on the Severed program in particular. And perhaps even Lumon has already found out that Open Mind is planning some sort of attack against them and knows Irving is working with them, which could also explain why Burt was put in Irving's path to begin with, so Lumon could gain their own intelligence and learn a little bit more about Open Mind and what they're planning. And could this all potentially lead to one giant showdown between Burt and Irving's Audis? Which could end up having a very tragic Shakespearean ending, to see Burt and Irving's innies fall in love with one another, only to have their Audis destroy one another. And where exactly would that leave Fields? I was pleasantly surprised to see that John Noble had been cast in the role of Fields in Season 2, which is a recasting from the Season 1 actor. And I'm hoping with Apple casting a more prominent actor in that role, we will see more of Fields in the future. But if nothing else, they certainly seem to be laying some very interesting groundwork to what could potentially happen between Burt and Irving's Audis. What started out as one of the most innocent relationships on Severance could turn out to be one of the darkest in the end. We also get a pretty interesting scene between Dylan and his Audi's wife in this episode as well, as they appear to be growing much closer, as she continues to teach Dylan a little bit more about his Audi and some of his failed ventures. And I feel like the more they communicate, the more she is seeing that Innie Dylan is the idealistic version of her husband, and maybe even the better version. And it seems the feelings they're developing are only continuing to get stronger, as later in the episode she lies to her husband about ever seeing Innie Dylan. And you do definitely feel a little bit for Innie Dylan in this episode after hearing some of the things he says to her during their visit. How he feels like they're not together all the time. How he feels like he is stuck down here while she is living a life up there with him. And I imagine things like this are usually why the innies aren't allowed any physical contact with the outside world or their families, usually, as they don't want the innies to long for a life on the outside that they can never have. At the end of the day, Dylan's visits with his Audi's family do kind of go against the very foundation of what Lumon is and what the Severed program stands for, giving Dylan attachments when they usually want their Severed employees to be completely detached. But overall, it was another decent episode of Severance as we get closer and closer to finding out not only what Cold Harbor is, and of course what really happened to Mark's wife. And now with the innies finding the drawing that Irving left for them that might potentially lead to the exports hallway and elevator, I get the feeling we are going to see our innies start to go on a mission to find this elevator over these next few episodes, and ultimately finding Miss Casey and getting her out of there, although I could potentially see that ending bittersweet as well. After all, I could totally see it playing out where they go on this very long and arduous journey to rescue Miss Casey, only to realize that they are never able to uncover Gemma ever again, that the Miss Casey persona is all that remains. A tragic circumstance of events, to say the least. But overall, it looks like these last 4 episodes are going to be filled with twists and turns as we get closer to the endgame, and finding out exactly what Lumon is working on with Cold Harbor. But that is going to do it today for our Episode 6 breakdown of Attila. And definitely leave your thoughts and comments down below. What did you think of Episode 6, and what are some of your predictions going forward? And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like on your way out and subscribe to stay up to date on all of our upcoming Severance content. And as always, keep those tinfoil hats on, folks, and I will see you on the next one.
Grow.